There's been a lot of warning that there are people deliberately trying to sow mayhem and confusion and anger. Some army of bots in Russia are happily trying to do that, and they've identified some of them. But a warning is no real defense against gullible people reading this stuff and believing it and acting upon it. And short of having some international regulation, which seems extremely unlikely, on how social media should be policed, there's very little that can be done.
It's been pretty fast and furious this morning, this afternoon, I should say. Let's take a breather and go over some of the stories of the day with our panel. Today with us are Michael Binyon from The Times and Kat Neelan, political editor of Tortoise. Good morning to you both. Kat, if I could start with you, the Cobra meeting has finished after, of course, talking about what to do about the wave of riots across the UK over the weekend. What really more could a new Labour government do think? There must be some pressure on them to do something, but sometimes doing something is not the most advisable course of action.
Well, I think one of the things that they are sort of under some pressure to do is whether or not to recall Parliament, but precisely in order to do what seems to be a bit of a sort of a unanswered question. I think MPs like to be able to have their say, but certainly in terms of sort of votes or granting any new powers, that doesn't seem to be necessary. And Keir Starmer, we have heard from this morning, saying that a standing army of specialist police officers is going to be deployed to go around the country. Already we have started to see some of those who have been arrested come before judges and offer their pleas. So we are certainly seeing a reaction of sorts. Whether that is going to be enough to kind of quell the unrest is sort of up for debate. And I have seen there are sort of clearly moves to organise further protests and riots and seemingly targeting refugee services and lawyers' offices, which I think will be rather frightening to those premises and those individuals concerned.
Kat, do you think just briefly, do you think the presence of Nigel Farage in Parliament impacts on that decision to recall Parliament one way or the other?
Well, I mean, he hasn't attended all that much. And
I think he would probably attend now, wouldn't he?
Well, he didn't attend when there was a debate about this in the last week before recess finally happened. He has certainly been making his thoughts known on social media, and he has been being criticised both implicitly and explicitly for some of his choice of language. I should think if he does attend, then he will face some criticism in the flesh as well. I think there's quite a few people who are very unhappy with the way that he and some of his colleagues have been behaving in this, and some of them sort of making light of the situation as well. And of course, there are some former MPs who are also sort of carping from the sideline as well. So I think a lot of people are kind of wanting to have their say. At the minute, it seems to be very much a kind of command and control approach that Keir Starmer is taking. He obviously called this Cobra meeting this morning with several senior ministers, including not just the Home Secretary and the Justice Secretary, but I think interestingly, the Science, Innovation Technology Secretary, of course, because of the concern around social media platforms and quite what is being done to try and sort of stem the sort of wave of language and organisation that's happening on those platforms.
Michael, if I could come to you on that point about online, which Keir Starmer was talking about in his brief comments after the Cobra meeting this morning. A lot of people looking at this will be thinking, hang on, if a newspaper published the details of a riot that we're trying to plan between us, the editor would very quickly find themselves in jail. And yet social media outlets are publishers, really, a lot like newspaper publishers. Can the government really do anything to put them on that same legal footing?
Well, they're certainly going to try, and that is one of the big questions that a lot of people are asking. Why is it that these social media platforms are open access to disinformation, to all kinds of lies, to incitement, to things posted that are deliberately intended to be provocative? And can't these social media companies be either made to monitor what's going up and made to take down offensive stuff, or fine very heavily if stuff does go up, or indeed whether the Online Safety Act that was passed after a lot of debate last year can be somehow adjusted or tweaked or improved so that it makes a much stiffer, much more painful for social media companies to allow this kind of thing to go out on their platforms.
There's an element of real politics in this, though, isn't there? The government can say what it likes about online content. The reality is they have no way of policing a server in California or in Iceland or wherever it is. They just do not have the control.
They don't, and that's one of the problems. And in fact, they don't have any real filters to stop disinformation getting through. And there's been a lot of warning that there are people deliberately trying to sow mayhem and confusion and anger. Some army of bots in Russia are happily trying to do that, and they've identified some of them. But a warning is no real defense against gullible people reading this stuff and believing it and acting upon it. And short of having some international regulation, which seems extremely unlikely, on how social media should be policed, there's very little that can be done. And the other problem, of course, is if you start to try to clamp down on social media, straight away you get those champions of free speech saying that this is an attempt to clamp down on free speech, which could lead to all sorts of dangerous consequences. So they're rather opposed to an attempt to really monitor what goes up on social media.
Mike, I'll just stay with you, and then Kat, if you could come in too. Do either of you think that, I mean, like after the 2011 riots, we thought this was going to be a watershed moment for UK society. Now, with the distance of 12 years, we realise that actually nothing much changed after them. Do we think that these riots really are important and that they're going to lead to big changes, or actually it's just, when the football season starts again, it will all calm down and nothing will have changed? Michael?
Well, I don't think nothing will have changed. They're certainly going to look at some of the underlying causes, which is anger in a lot of northern cities, especially about what they see as unequal deprivation that affects the north. I mean, this is leveling up to some extent. Anger about immigration, and particularly about immigrants being housed in hotels in city centres, where people look at that and say, well, they've got a fine hotel to live in, and we're really on the breadline in bad housing, and things of that kind. So there is going to be a real effort to get something visible done about keeping the immigrant numbers down, or trying to move people who've been denied asylum out of the country. That, I think, will be speeded up in every way. As for attempts to regulate social media, well, they will make attempts and see what they can do. In the end, I think the anger will fade. I don't think it'll go away, but it will fade. And with a real clampdown and probably very long prison sentences for those who are seen as instigators, that will be a deterrent.
Kat, what about you? Is this going to change the fabric of UK society, or is it just something we'll forget about quite quickly?
I mean, I think I share Michael's views, both in terms of it sort of fading away, but sort of maybe just going down to a sort of quiet simmer rather than a sort of an overly boiling situation. But I think one area where perhaps I am a bit optimistic is that I think that politicians, not all of them necessarily, but a large number of them, will realise that their language has real world consequences. And I think we've already seen a slight sort of shift in some of the language that is being used by some. We see the Conservative leadership candidates, some of them coming out and talking in much more measured terms and drawing a clear line between themselves and Nigel Farage and the Reform Party. So I think that there is kind of a recognition of the sort of line that leads from words spoken in the Commons or on television, and that may last for a while. I'm sure it won't last forever, but if our sort of elected leaders can learn to speak a bit more proportionately, then perhaps that will filter down through the ranks. I mean, I think it's very notable that one of the chants that's being used is "Stop the Boats," which of course was one of Rishi Sunak's 5 pledges.